units of measure must be in the source, must be made electronically. So therefore, the units of the measure must be international units of revenue. International units of revenue, not dollars. Revenue. We're revenuing the revenue. You should not attempt to purchase something that is in the wrong venue. You need to be in the revenue, the revenue, and since we identify the international unit as revenue, that is what must be used to pay a bill. The only way we have found to obtain revenue to do this is to have your tax preparer file federal tax form 1099 OID. Now, not you fill it out. Anybody that's out there telling you to fill out a 1099 OID is taking you down the wrong course. They're not licensed by the licensor as a licensee, and they're not insured. Take it to a filer. H&R Block maybe. J&H tax form preparation. Okay? And have them do it. They're insured if they make a mistake. They don't go to jail for making a mistake. Okay? And they're licensed by the licensor as a licensee to do it. And they're going to do it for you. Take all the hard work out of it. I've always said, you don't have to do any of that shit. There are people and servants in place that are already happy to help you and are compensated very handsomely to do it. It's just a matter of knowing what the fuck to tell them. And yes, although a big Ponzi scheme, as you start to become learned, you will really start to like this system. I guarantee you will. Because it is all taken care of. And so you can resent it and go, I'm not going to learn it. I'm not going to focus on this. Or you can get a little closer to God and what he granted to us, which is the land of milk and honey on this earth, which is why he gave his only begotten son. And if you don't think this is biblical, just stop watching this right now, because I ain't got nothing to teach you and I ain't got nothing to fucking show you. I promise you that. If you don't think this is biblical, if you don't think this is spiritual, you're wasting your time on here. Just turn this shit off and walk the fuck away, because you're the type of individual that will end up in jail. Don't even try this if you're not connected spiritually and understand how this diabolical system actually works. You need to be in the revenue. And since we identify the international unit as revenue, that is what we must be used to pay the bill. That is what we must use to pay the bills. We identify, the only way we have found to obtain revenue to do this is to have your tax preparer file the federal tax form 1099 OID on the issue and ask him to give you an advance on the tax refund. Okay? It's an advance on the tax refund. The tax refund comes from the source, as that is where the 1099 report returned to source. You must report to the source. You must remember that the revenue travels in electronic circuits in return to the source. Dollars are not eligible units to travel electronically, as they are measured in whole numbers. Dollars go wire transfer, which originates with a debt instrument. Okay? It's oriented with a debt instrument. So dollars cannot be transferred electronically. So dollars are never sent through an electronic fund transfer. Okay? Dollars are never, ever transferred through an EFT, which stands for electronic fund transfer. However, dollars can be wired. All right? Dollars carry liability, and the people holding them carry that liability to make sure the taxes are paid for carrying that debt and using that debt. Maybe I can simplify my comments by saving you might take your bills to, say, H&R Block and ask them to file the federal tax form 1099 OID on your issue and give you the advance on the tax refund? H&R Block will get the tax refund based on the discount to maturity. Thus, your advance will come in tax-paid dollars. A closed escrow no longer open to the public. It is these open escrows where criminal charges are taken from the assumed when escrow closes. With the voluntary 1099 tax report, there is no longer anywhere for agent provocateurs to assume charges from. All the actions against us come from open escrows. So after filing federal tax form 1099 OID on the issue, the tax is returned to the source and escrow closes. I don't believe that a case can be maintained against one if the 1099 is filed and the escrow is closed, because that tax is now paid. There is no debt. So the escrow is still open, and that is where the assumed charges come from. The guilty, not guilty issue is applicable, but only in tax deferral, as that is where they assume their charges are from. Open escrow, but when we get the tax preparer to file the 1099 OID on the particular issue in question, the dollar becomes revenue. The dollar becomes revenue, a tax, by the voluntary confession and return to source. Treasury Direct, your Social Security number, okay? The source is a mutual fund held by the county attorney, and that mutual fund was purchased with a blocked grant that used your foreign credit blocked therein to enable someone, agent provocateur, to assume the use of these funds in a true bill against you. Adolf Hitler had a conversation with his fiance's finance minister, in which he said things that will make clear where contrary claims come from. This was discovered in the book, The 20th Century Journey, by William Scherer, where he tells of Hitler's question to the finance minister. He said, "We have made the political decision to build up our military in violation of the treaties. So, how are we going to finance the buildup?" The finance minister said, "First, you will need to use the printing presses, and second, we have confiscated enormous amounts of the Jewish property, and third, we will block the foreign credit that will enable you to use the credit of your political enemies to build up your army." So what you see there is the formula for a block grant as the means to derive foreign private credit from the rolls of residents of municipalities in the county that is run by the county attorney and the one who prosecutes you on charges therefrom. These block grants are the credit used by the county attorney to purchase mutual funds that are the source of revenue used to finance the product of those who bring bills against you. These mutual funds are the derivatives used to finance the IMF and are the source the 1099 instructions refer to. So when we get a bill from a merchant or vendor, that bill was financed by the source. That is measured in international units, revenue that can travel in electronic circuits, electronic fund transfer, in return, tax return to the source. Whereas dollars measured in whole numbers cannot pass through the electronic circuit, electronic fund transfer, here is where the bill must be reported voluntarily on federal tax form 1099 OID to identify those dollars as tax revenue and thus eligible to pass to the source for settlement and closing in exchange, Treasury Direct, Social Security number. Another way to identify the source, mutual fund, is the source is exempt from state and municipal taxes, but not federal. That the reason to file federal tax form 1099 OID on the particular issue is to tax the sum of the bill back to the source. H&R Block can do that as you take your bills to them and have them report on the said 1099 OID, and you can get an advance on the tax refund immediately. They advertise on TV how fast and easy you can get an advance on your tax return. Everyone assumes a tax return is a 1040, but there are lots of tax reporting forms, and the 1099s are some of them. Only they are voluntary reporting. They are not mandatory like the others, but nevertheless, the reporting identifies the source as a small claim, expressed in international units and eligible for a judgment to enforce tax recovery in small claims court. That judgment can be extended to, say, an quiet title and ejectment action would only apply after the said 1099 OID, I skipped a line. That judgment can be extended to, say, an order for release of prisoner held as collateral. Thus, this becomes a habeas corpus. The quiet title and ejectment action would only apply after the said 1099 OID return is made, as it is after getting the escrow closed by the tax return to the source that one has actual settlement in fact. I don't think the mirror image is going to have much effect with the business because the mirror is relating to things and accounts of whole items measured in whole numbers, and we are talking about charges that can pass through electronic circuits as a matter of fact, so it looks like this reduces the idea down to a very small unit of a single source, thus one world order. With that idea in mind, we don't look at a credit as opposed to a debt or to a debit, like in a mirror image, but the two are one and the same, thus one world order. I think the accrual accounting method will bear this out. It is the national currency that is not eligible to pay these debts because the international units I am referring to are derivatives leveraged 1,000 times or 1 million times the number we need not be concerned with. We only need to be concerned with the bill we have for ourselves to make settlement on. That is done by taking our bills and includes indictments to the H&R Block tax preparer and request he file the 1099 OID on the issue for return, a tax return, to the source, the mutual fund, for settlement and closing and exchange Treasury Direct. Then, after filing the said 1099 OID, ask for your advance on the tax refund. You will be paid the discount to maturity, and H&R Block will get your tax refund to balance their books. Something else should be said here about national currency. These are issues from our national Federal Reserve and are not international currency. The international currency, IMF, derives from municipal reserves, mutual funds that are obtained by the county attorney, like I mentioned earlier, and are a small claim by virtue of the international unit of measure used to account the sum of a bill. Thus, a small claim court is an international court. When admitting to be a debtor in possession is to admit to a tax liability because the debt has not been paid. One must request the 1099 OID be filed on the issue to settle the tax liability. There must be a return to source for settlement and closing. So it is in the National Reserve that created national currency. It is municipal reserves that create international currency, IMF. These each have a different value and different character to their nature. Thus, the national currency dollars cannot pass through electronic fund transfer circuits like international units of revenue does. It's like speaking a foreign language one to another. The central idea is in the federal tax form 1099 OID that I have written about. But now, to advance into action for the remedy, we here have discovered that the small claims court has two main reasons one can file for an action. First is the $3,000 limit that we cannot use because it does not provide enough relief dollars to settle the controversy. So the second jurisdiction it provides for one to sue for tax recovery. Now, we are getting somewhere. This small claim action enables us to obtain enforcement of the federal tax form 1099 OID issue. Because that filing is voluntary and it defines the small claim issue, because that filing is because that filing is voluntary and it defines the small claim issue as a tax requested to return to source, so that is eligible in the small claim court to sue for tax recovery defined in the federal tax form 1099 OID request to file and return the issue to source. Now, when the request for the federal tax form 1099 OID is refused, dishonored, you can file the small claim on small claim court with dishonored contract being a contempt of court, whereby you send the sheriff to purge the contempt by obtaining their check for the amount of the tax recovery sought, and release your possession of all the property in controversy, or arrest and take the offender into custody and held until he pays. Now, here's where everyone fails in their thinking, because how does one queue for, say, 200,000 in small claim, or excuse me, how does one sue, how does one sue for, say, 200,000 in small claim when the dollar amount appears to exceed the $3,000 small claim court limit? Here's why. The U.S. dollar amount is the venue and is a delinquent tax issue in a deferred debt somewhere. So, what you are pursuing is a tax recovery that is expressed in international units of revenue, thus a new venue, a separate and distinct jurisdiction in the small claims court. Awesome, huh? Thus a new venue or revenue. Accrual accounting brings it back to zero, balancing the books. The reason this is because the tax recovery revenue is in negative numbers, less than one whole number, and qualifies as a small claim, whereas the claim in dollars are assumed to be in whole numbers. Therefore, you can see the difference between delinquent tax dollars and delinquent tax recovery revenue. The revenue is the small claim, exempt, and the dollars are delinquent tax deferrals in debt instruments held by someone, probably by the county attorney. Statutes at large, not a small claim. Once the issue is returned to source, that amount is eligible to be paid in dollars, tax paid dollars, prepaid. So the property and the dollars must be released to you as a matter of public policy, and it contains the real amount of damages one would otherwise have sustained and expressed in dollars. So, with that in mind, I think it is a good idea to name the county attorney along with the SBA or bank or banks or whoever had an active role in taking the property in question. probably those who are paying the delinquent dollars and alleged taxes that are not yet returned to source. Thus, they are delinquent taxes eligible for tax recovery actions as a small claim as said above. So I hope you can see the full scope of the action to take for your remedy. When you fully absorb the meaning of all of this, you should begin to realize why there is no remedy in any court most of us have observed these last years. The basic reason is because everyone has expressed their claims in whole dollars, whether dealing with government, corporations, or agencies, and since those are all offerings of revenue, they are dealing in international units of revenue, not dollars. We have simply not been speaking the same language, and everyone goes down in defeat as a result. Also, a basic flaw with everyone is that the claim must be confessed, volunteered, 1099 OID, and not protested. Because the protest causes a barrier to the tax recovery as a dishonor, and our accuser uses the dishonor as their revenue in a tax deferral until we are able to obtain the small claim judgment to compel them to return a tax return, the issue to the source. Then too, you will not want to refer to your small claim in any plural reference. The small claims court, using the plural reference, is the public claim of the collective and multiple claims of dollars that need a broker to break them apart for you, and there are no private individuals identified as the filing of 1099 OID is not mandatory. Thus, it is an individual single private claim. So, that claim is singular, a small claim. Even though there may be numerous public entries into the account, so keep your reference to your claim a small claim. In small claims court, it is thus an identifiable tax charge when the request for federal tax form 1099 OID is requested on the issue to return to the source. Thus, we have a voluntary tax to report, income tax, etc. The voluntary request for the tax report marks the item as a private account exempt from lien or levy. Income tax is voluntary and not mandatory. It is drawn in by magnetic energy charge, thus a withdrawal being the method of taking into account attraction. In a letter I had sent, I had made a request for the federal tax form 1099 OID that went to the county attorney, E.T. All, and it includes a request to return release all of my property subsequent to this issue. That includes my body. That is the acceptance and return of their offer of the bond amount that was set on me in court. So, his dishonor of that request is the cause for my small claim for tax recovery in small claims court. The dishonor is a treasury bill in this respect, eligible for commodity market exchange. So we can see in all of this that the source of issue is the taxpayer and the tax recovery, or tax return and the tax collector. Or a tax return is the tax collector. So, we or our straw man are both payer and collector, but we have this accomplished by our employees, IRS, corporate agencies, etc. This is why we request of them to file federal tax form 1099 OID to identify the issue as a delinquent tax that we can sue for tax recovery and subsequent release and return of property. With that, I think you have enough information to start an action for recovery of your property and the revenue to operate it. Maybe we are looking at a new frontier and new settlements on that frontier. It can be seen from the chart that gold increases from the grantor to the Federal Reserve. This is showing the use of derivatives to enlarge the super fund, but for the bill to return to the Federal Reserve via the U.S. agent, the Federal Tax Form 1099 OID is needed to identify the currency as revenue and not tax delinquent dollars. This simply means the issue identified by the 1099 OID must return to the source before the resulting property can be returned or released to the owner because whoever is the agent who received the return to the source must pay the amount to the owner at owner's request to balance his books. So, it is the issue returning to source that brings the charge to neutral, zero, whereby the amount paid out to the owner is tax-paid dollars, prepaid, and debts are gone from the account. The exemption is merely the tax charge going to zero in the agent's trust account after returning to the owner the tax-paid dollars. The agent doesn't get the exemption until actually paying the owner, although he probably assumes he has it. So this is the reason Federal Tax Form 1099 OID should be volunteered to displace the assumptions with a fact, okay? The request for your agent to file Federal Tax Form 1099 OID on the particular issue identifies the agent as a tax protester if he fails to do as you ask. Ye have not because ye ask not, okay? It's getting a little late. I'm getting a little wore out and tired, guys. And there's some typos throughout this that make it really, really hard to read. And piecemeal it together. Anyway, I think I pretty much laid out the gist for you here. They're your agents and agency. They're negotiating instruments, securities, bonds, using your line of credit behind your back. And they're getting away with it because people aren't taking the time to read about the system and what it is. The land of milk and honey does exist. You can put these trustees in their place and you can get them to perform. And understanding the tax code. Everybody goes, Derek, why do you read codes? Why do you read all that shit? You say so often that it's not important. It isn't. It's important to understand what they're bound by so you can enforce it. After all, you are the enforcer of the law, are you not? You see something that's a wrong afoot, do you have an obligation to correct it? Yes, you do. Especially if it's a moral obligation. You see somebody trying to abduct a boy or a girl from the side of the road, you have an obligation to put your foot up somebody's ass. The question is, when the call arises, will you stand up and do it? This is not an easy fight, ladies and gentlemen. It's really not even a fight. It's about conviction. Are you going to stand with conviction and understanding the knowledge and technology that is being shown to you here? Do you have the cojones it takes to ask a simple fucking question? Go ahead and prepare that 1099 OID. And Frank, give me a fucking call when it's done. How about that? How about them apples? Oh, you don't want to do it? Frank, that's exactly what the 13909 is for, the 4506A, and the 211 form. So I appreciate your noncompliance. I'm sure the IRS will be more than happy to hear that you're unwilling as an agent and agency who absolutely is bound by the IRC because your bar association entered into contract with the Internal Revenue Service. So I'm sure they will just be absolutely fucking elated to hear that you're unwilling to fill out the 1099 OID and do a full accounting, dickhead. You see how that works? I have grounds to come into the small claims court and make my claim for their failed performance, their breach of trust, okay? And when you're doing this, you're actually helping the Treasury. You're actually bringing down the national debt. The problem is with the whole numbers we have had in the dollars that the House Joint Resolution 192 chart shows as expansions of gold increase, but the increase that occurs or seems to occur because of so many more dollars to represent a particular property item, even though there are more dollars representing the value of a particular property, the property is still the same and has not increased like the dollars seem to have increased. So the problem is to realize that there are two different values put on a dollar. As one is a US dollar expressed in whole number, and the other is revenue expressed in international units of revenue, leveraged by brokers and attorneys by derivatives attaching a municipal tax account and increasing the debt by triple-aught, 3 zeros, adding 3 zeros to multiply the revenue into international units of revenue. Thus, there is an illusion of inflation and expansion of the property value, when actuality, what happens is the account goes inverse and the numbers, being negative, go forever small. Thus, the small claim is a small claim court. It seems we must go from our old values of whole dollars into the new values of revenue. As the increased numbers identify the property that was represented by lesser dollars of earlier or prior issue, thus priority. So here we find the reason for voluntary reporting of a tax to charge a return to source. Thus, the tax is charged to close the circuit where there was no charge before. Because it was assumed and thereby no charge, it was trumped up to accuse the victim with an assumed probable cause that forces the accused victim to voluntarily accept, charge a tax return as a matter of fact to displace the assumed charges, which is no charge that continues as a tax deferred debt until a tax charge in fact returns the issue to the source. Thus, the reason to ask for Federal Tax Form 1099 OID be filed on the issue. The request identifies the particular issue as a delinquent tax, which changes to whole numbers of value to international units of revenue, which the prior dollar have been multiplied by 1,000. As a mill levy to increase revenues in the international community. It is a voluntary request for the Federal Tax Form 1099 OID that identifies the energy charged in the property to enable an identification of private property to be made. Without that request, voluntarily, the particular issue in question is assumed to be public property, and the prior debt continues on in a tax deferral of some sort, gathering interest, increasing the national domestic debt. So the biggest problem I see is that people have all these theories found in research of the statutes, but they fail to grasp what happens to the dollar when its value changes 1,000 times itself. One must volunteer the tax information so the issue, the body, does not fall into execution of law. Executions are unlawful as the tax 1099 OID is not mandatory, so they must be voluntary to enable the taxed issue to return to the source and settle and close and closing in exchange can occur. This cannot occur by an execution, public law, but by agreement. Because the Redeemer does not live in false claims, if we agree and accept the probable cause alleged and request federal tax form 1099 OID to tax the issue back to the source, there is no longer a false claim, and the debt can be redeemed by the tax charging the circuit escrow to close in settlement. Let's say a debt from a mortgage is the issue. The mortgage, $1,000. Mortgage is sold to new owner who multiplies it by 1,000. Now we have a $1 million mortgage, okay? So it multiplies to 1,000 times triple odd equals 1 million. The 1 million is the new value of the body property, which for which community service obtains grants, blocked grants, in lieu of the taxes they can no longer pass bonding issues in the local community. The people vote them down. The funds are raised by assuming tax revenue from the victim's municipal tax liability, from which they obtain cash advances by bidding and holding mutual funds that provide liquid funds for public uses, deferrals, while binding, while the victim's account in the municipality has been charged as collateral on the advance, a tax liability. Blocked grants are funded with foreign credit, which enables the agents provocateurs to use the credit of their political enemies to carry out their sinister purposes. Okay? Are we not foreign to the public, being private? Then whose credit has gone into the blocked grants? Are these from H&R Block? H&R Block stock trading in the market? So unless there is a voluntary request for reporting the said tax, there is no fact to identify property free of tax liability. So no matter what sort of rationalizing one does to use administrative and court procedures to set off or set aside or otherwise discharge the debt obligation, to dispose of the debt, one cannot get rid of the debt because the public has no mandatory powers to redeem debt issues, but only use deferrals that declare the debt paid but is only deferred into the hands of someone who agrees to hold the debt, and whatever type the interest-bearing debt is placed. So, the one option to all of this is to volunteer a request to file federal tax form 1099 OID to charge the tax on the issue for its return to the source. Now, there is a fact to take the charge issue. Okay, got it. Now there is a fact to take the charged issue into account and dispose of the debt by the balance going to zero. Now, some of the administrative procedures might work because the dollars have been taken from the old venue, US dollars, and reissued in the new revenue or revenue as international units, a small claim, eligible to file for tax recovery in small claim court. So, one can see the old venue dollar do not have the same relative value to particular property that the revenue has. As the county has taken all their tax accounts and sold or traded them for revenue measured in international units that are mutual funds valued in this assessment multiplied by 1,000, these dollars of revenue are now a small claim, because they are voluntarily identified in the request for federal tax form 1099 OID to tax the particular issue back to the source, and are eligible in small claims court to sue for tax recovery and obtain a judgment to enforce the return to source. You can't stress this enough, that it takes the individual effort to request federal tax form 1099 OID to be filed on the issue to make it a small claim. Any other effect leaves the dollars in the account delinquent because they do not have the means to become a small claim until the principal accused requests the tax be reported and taken into the new venue called revenue. After this occurs, then the dollars can be sought in small claims court. After this occurs, then the dollars can be sought in small claims court in a tax recovery action. But without the request for the tax report 1099 OID, the dollars are delinquent and contraband because they have not been identified as tax revenue and they are not eligible as a small claim to enforce recovery. They must go to the source, dollar for dollar, to fulfill House Joint Resolution 192, Public Law 7310, 1248, Stat 48, as a matter of public policy. And when that happens, the property expressed by that debt becomes free of debt. The foregoing explanation might not be perfect in its identification of the subject relative matters, but it should improve your outlook on the problem. When we come back, we'll get back to more thoughts on the 1099 OID.